Well, good evening, everyone. It is so great to see us here. I'm so glad you were able to come and join us for this. We have a wonderful evening planned for everyone tonight. As we continue our Reach Deep study, we're going to be in the next several steps here. And thank you for putting up with us holding. We were waiting on a few people who aren't quite in yet, but they said they'll make it tonight, and I was also having to turn on the recorder. If you missed last week's session, or technically it was last week, but we did it on Tuesday, go back and watch that. It's going to be important before you do the on your own part this evening. But one of the things I wanted to say is I was actually having to press record so that we could have a version that doesn't skip around that I can upload later. If you go back and watch last week's session, it does skip around a little bit. I forgot to press record, so I don't have a hard copy on my hard drive that I can upload without the skipping. But I did press record tonight, so we'll have a low latency one this evening for you to go back to. Okay, so we've got a lot to cover this evening, and I know it's going to be a wonderful time together. And as you hopefully have been going through the Reach Deep class, hopefully this is becoming a practice that you're excited about and something that you're looking forward to putting in to your maybe not daily Bible study if you don't have a lot of time, but definitely those times that you want to go deeper, those times that you want to get a better handle on the text, and the times in which you're maybe teaching or preaching and so forth. This is really going to help broaden and expand your horizons in the text. Leading up to tonight, we have been discussing the first 5 steps in the Reach Deep process. These first steps represent your original work. Now, if you remember back to session 1 and 2, we talked about this, that Reach Deep is an acronym, and Reach is your original work, while Deep is when we get into consulting, other works, and so forth. And we'll get into that tonight. The first 5 steps, Reach, it does not rely on commentaries. It does not rely on study Bibles. It doesn't rely on anything except your own work. Now, there's a lot of benefits to doing your own work. One is that when you finally do read those notes in your study Bible, or the notes that a commentator writes in a commentary and so forth, you have a much clearer understanding of what's actually going on and what's behind the scenes, if you will. You have ownership of that. But also, you can have a better idea of if that commentator is actually right or not. Rather than using the commentaries and so forth, the first 5 steps only uses a Bible dictionary in order to define unfamiliar terms and identify unfamiliar people and places and so forth. It is not to tell you what the text is saying, which is what a commentary does. Rather, the Bible dictionary that you're using in the first few steps is just helping you get a grasp and get over some of those ideas that you're finding hard because we don't use that vernacular today and so forth. So the first 5 steps of your original work includes the following. It includes reading. So we're asking ourselves, what does it say? We're engaging. So we're asking, what do I see? Then we're assessing the text. What do I need to learn from this text? And then after we assess it, we're looking at the context. What is the context of this scripture? What is the context of its setting and so forth? And then the last of the first word is highlight. We're highlighting the main point that the author is trying to get to. And so when we're looking at this, we want to make sure that we're highlighting that main point so that we truly understand what it is that the author is trying to say. And so the first 2 blanks you have there on your handout is context and highlight. And these are important because that's what we covered last week if you weren't here, and that's going to be coming much more into play as we continue this study. Now, moving forward, we now begin to look at the second part of the acronym, and that is the word deep. The word deep. So reach, we already talked about reach stands for read, engage, assess, context, and highlight. That's that first word. Now deep is what we're going to talk about, and deep stands for dig, examine, edit, and practice. Dig, examine, edit, and practice. Specifically tonight, we'll be discussing the first two, which is dig and examine. Once we complete dig and examine, we're going to skip next week, and then the following week we will finish out our study with the last two, edit and practice, and talk about what those mean and how those apply to what our endeavor is in this study. I want to provide you a hint. At this point, you will want to have some access to some sort of commentaries, sermons, if you will, maybe journals, study Bibles. We're going to look at websites and some software that you can help. But now, at this point in this class here tonight, we're going to start looking at the works of other people in addition to our own work. Remember, it is vital that you do not begin with this process of looking at commentaries, and that's why I don't like study Bibles that much. I think they're really great in some ways, but I also have a relationship with them that's kind of tense because it's easy to just look at the bottom of that study Bible and say, oh, okay, well, this is what it means, when you've done none of the work yourself, and you don't even know if that's accurate or not because you haven't done the prep work. And so while study Bibles are a good thing, we often jump too quickly down. So remember, up until you get to the deep part, up until step 6, you don't want to look down at that study Bible. You don't want to look for a commentary. You don't want to do a Google search unless it's just for a term that you're trying to define or a person that you're trying to figure out in the text here. So, in order to get a good handle on the text, you need to do your own work. So I want to begin. I want to begin with what we're talking about tonight. As I said earlier, tonight we're talking about dig, and that's where we're going to begin. Dig asks the question, what do others see? What do others see when they read this text? So we're looking at dig. What do others see? That's your blank. Here we are looking to see what others observe and teach, your next blank, about this passage. Now we've done our work. We've come to our understanding of what the main point is. And now we want to know, what do other people observe and teach about this passage? This is where you dig up and read the thoughts of others using commentaries and study Bibles and handbooks and so forth. All of those great resources out there. This is where you dig up that information from other commentators. To do this, we must learn first to pick good resources. Why? Because as your next point says, not all resources are created equally. Now, I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time reading resources, reading commentaries, reading books, reading sermons from other people, just trying to learn and get a grasp on what's out there. And I've noticed that not all resources are created equally, not just because of the author, but because of how they are used and the purpose for which they are being used. For example, not all commentaries are good commentaries. Anybody today, anybody can write a book, but that doesn't make it worthwhile. Anybody can write a book and slap the word commentary on the cover and say, I've written a commentary. Anybody can print whatever they want in that commentary, and it doesn't make it authoritative. It doesn't make it a good commentary. Some are well written, some are horribly written. Some are done quickly, and so it's choppy. Some are written painstakingly over time, and so it's either flows really well or it's pretty thick and heavy when you read it. Some have great insights, while others have poor insights or no insights. So not all resources are created equally. So as we talk about digging and asking, what do others see? What do they teach and observe about this passage? We have to begin to look at, how do we choose good resources? Specifically tonight, what I'm going to talk about is, how do we choose good commentaries? You see, if we don't know how to choose a good commentary, we're never going to get the benefit of those commentaries, and we're only going to get so deep, because if we choose the bad commentary, we're not going to get anything, and if we choose a commentary that's way out of our league, we're not going to understand anything. So how do I choose a good commentary? Well, I want to start out by listing a few things to look for in a commentary. First, you choose by the author. You choose by the author of that commentary. Now, if you're just starting out, if you've never looked at a commentary before, the reality is you may not know who different authors are, and that's okay. That's one of the blessings of some of the resources you'll get in the next class, is we'll be better able to understand who some of these authors are. You may grab at various authors at first, but as you start reading and as you start understanding what they have to say, you'll start gravitating towards certain authors. But we need to choose, first of all, by the author. There is nothing wrong with having a set of commentaries. Now, a set would be like a bunch of commentaries written by a bunch of different people, but all combined together. And I've got some sets. But not all sets are created alike. Not all sets are equal in their usefulness. There are some sets that just take anyone and everyone as a contributor. There are other sets that you know it's going to be good because the majority of the people in there are specialists in the book that they're writing on, and they're world-renowned for that writing. So we need to choose by the author. We don't choose by denominational affiliation. We don't choose by sets or series. For example, a lot of times people will say, well, I go to the Church of Christ, since most of us watching this are Church of Christ. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to get a set by the Church of Christ. They gave no attention to who the author is. And they may not realize that although some of those sets are very well written, some of those sets take everyone who, regardless of what training they have or what training they don't have in Scripture. And so we got to be careful with that, not to choose just because they're within our fellowship, not to choose because we see it in a series that has the brand, whether it's Church of Christ, Christian Church, Baptist, whatever it might be. We don't want to choose just based upon affiliation. There's got to be something deeper. Because let's be honest, in every affiliation out there, there are people who teach right and people who teach wrong. There are people who write well and people who write horribly out there. And so, the first step is asking, what do others see? We got to dig into that. And by doing this, we have to choose good commentaries. And the way we start choosing good commentaries is first by looking at authors. Now, you might not know who some of the good authors are, and I'm going to recommend some here in a little bit, don't worry. While you may not know who some of those authors are, there's always people who can help. There's lists online. Now, you want to be careful about lists, but Harding School of Theology actually has a great large list under its library tab for everyone to look at, and it lists several authors and tells you a little bit about each author, or it tells you at least a little bit about each commentary that it recommends and why it recommends it. Now, that doesn't mean they agree with everything that's said by those authors, because that's the other thing you got to keep in mind. You're not going to agree with everything every person says. If you do, there's a word for that. It's called gullible. Every single person gets something wrong, except Jesus. But some people get a lot more wrong than others. So just because you don't agree with everything a commentator says doesn't mean the commentary's not good. But when you look at the author, you want to look for certain things. You want to look for things such as, what is their education? What is their background? Do they know what they're talking about? You want to look at the front matter and see what their experience has been. If you're looking for a commentary that focuses on teaching the text rather than just information, you want to make sure, is this somebody who actually teaches or has a history of doing a good job teaching? Because if not, it may not be the best fit for what your needs are. So you want to look at the author, choose by the author. But you also want to choose, and this is your next spot, choose by type. Choose by type. Now, let me explain a couple of things, and hopefully this will get a good idea going of what I mean here. There are different levels or types of commentaries. There are a variety of types. Now, I'm only going to mention 3, and these are in your notes here. But there's a variety of levels and types of commentaries. The first level, which is your first blank under this, is the scholarly or the technical commentary. Now, the scholarly commentary is generally difficult to understand and to read without advanced training. It is geared primarily for preachers, for professors, and for scholars, those with a formal Bible education. Not because it's saying the people in the pews who don't have that are any less, it's because it uses terminology that is not common vernacular. They utilize original language, the Greek and the Hebrew and the Aramaic, and they give no translation, or if they do, it's very little translation, because the expectation is the one who reads it already understands that language. So when we talk about the scholarly or the technical commentary, there are some pros and cons to it. Let's start with the pros. Now, there's several more than I'm listing. I'm just listing a few just so that you're kind of aware. Because if we want to choose good commentaries, we have to understand what we're looking at when we're looking through a commentary. The pros of a scholarly and technical commentary are that it uses a precise technical terms to explain complex meanings. For example, rather than going on and on and on about pulling out of the text what the author means and a deep discussion about that and the dangers of that and just kind of going on and on and on about that versus reading into the text what we have, our own preconceptions and what we want it to say and so forth. In the technical scholarly commentaries, you don't have those discussions that might take 2 or 3 pages. What you have is basically something like this. Rather than going on an explanation of what you do want to do and what you don't want to do, a technical commentary might say this: as students of the text, we ought to be more concerned about exegesis, and we ought to practice less eisegesis of the text. You see, if we do that, then everyone who's had training understands that terminology. And so they can be a lot more concise in their wording by using that term. Now, every profession has this. I'm just throwing this out as an example. You hear big words, eschatology, soteriology, theology, all these big terms out there. That's really found in these technical scholarly commentaries. So that's one pro. Now, that is a pro for me. It may not be a pro for a good quality for those who are just trying to teach a Bible class and don't really want to get into all that technicality. What's great about it for people like myself and other ministers and scholars and for professors is that it helps us wrap our head around an incredibly complex idea in a very short amount of time. But another positive, if you will, for the scholarly technical commentaries is that they focus on the original biblical languages. Now, we already mentioned those. The original biblical languages is Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. And so these technical commentaries, they focus on that language and they dive into that language and they parse out the language and they utilize that language so much so that you can get an exact idea of where they're coming from. And that leads into the third reason I believe that they're good. They provide a wealth of research and they provide a wealth of primary source information. So these technical and scholarly commentaries, what they generally do is they're not normally quoting this scholar or that scholar about this other scholar or about this ancient author. What they're doing is they're looking and reading that ancient author in the Latin and translating it and talking about it directly. Or they're not talking about Genesis 1:1 in the English language, they're looking at the primary source, the Hebrew Bible, and they're translating it from the Hebrew and putting the Hebrew in there and talking about the Hebrew words. You see, so one of the pros is that it provides a wealth of primary source information, which can be very helpful. But we also see some downsides, if you will, of these scholarly and technical commentaries. Now, these downsides are really, in many ways, the reverse of what we were just talking about. One of the cons is that it's very technical in scholarly language that is not common vernacular for the normal church membership. So you might have experienced this. You may have thought one day going through a church library, or maybe you know a minister or a preacher and you've opened up one of their books and you're reading, and then all of a sudden it's like, it's not literally Greek you're reading, but it feels like it because there's all these words and all these concepts and ideas that you've never heard before. You see, those scholarly commentaries use these very technical words and this language that's not the common vernacular for most people outside of those circles. Rather than explaining it, like we'll get into with some of the other types of commentaries. Again, so it's good, but it's not so good if you don't understand it. Not that we can't learn that, but to be honest, there's a lot of options out there where you don't have to worry and learn all of that. Another issue is it often does not translate the Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic into English. Rather, as I said earlier, it expects the reader to be able to translate it for themselves. So they'll literally type in the original language with no translation. Now, I was going to bring several of my books home so I can show some of this to you, but I stacked them up and it was just way too many books to bring home. So I wasn't able to do that, but we're going to be teaching this class at my congregation probably in the fall, and I plan on having some stuff then for you guys to see if you're part of our congregation there. And when I do this again online down the road, I'm hoping that I can take some photos of it and put it on the screen for you guys. But also, two other negatives, or possible negatives, it often uses heavy and difficult terminology, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. It's often a little heavy and difficult to read. It's definitely not light reading. Even I trudge through some of this sometimes because it gets pretty technical and pretty deep on it. But also, and this is what a lot of people who are just trying to teach a generic Bible class, this is what a lot of the complaints are. It provides little, if any, application for today. The technical scholarly commentary is not created to apply the text today. It's primarily created for you to understand the text and for you to understand how they got to their argument or their conclusions of that text. So, two of the older examples of scholarly commentaries. Now, I'm going to say the second name wrong here. It's two people who are listed on this set, but there's one named Keil and Dilch, and it's the Commentary on the Old Testament. It's a set. Now, if you go to CBD or christianbook.com and you buy this set, the reality is it has a ton of Hebrew and it never translates it for you. But this is an example of a scholarly or technical commentary. In fact, if you read it, it's like 8-point font and it's incredibly dense to get through. I have to read it in strides whenever I'm trying to work through a text and get their take on it. Another one is Meyer's commentary on the New Testament. Same thing goes on there. It's maybe not quite as dense as Keil and Dilch, but it is one of those situations where it's a scholarly technical article. So scholarly technical, that's the first level of commentaries when you're choosing by type. You got to ask, what type do I need for my purposes? Do I want a scholarly technical one? Now, the next one is hybrid commentaries. Now, these are not technical terms that we learn in school. I'm kind of making these types up, so bear with me if there's other classification systems, but I'm just using this. So first is scholarly or technical. The second type is hybrid commentaries. These attempt to find the sweet spot between the technical and then the lower one we'll talk about in a few moments. They tend to find that sweet spot between the consumer and the scholarly. While technical language and Hebrew and Greek is often used, more often than not, it is explained and translated for the reader so that those without a technical understanding of the text and language can understand most of what's being said, if not all of it. Now, there are pros and cons to this. Some of the pros are that it's a blend of both worlds. You get some of that scholarly stuff, but you also get some of that applicable stuff. It provides depth combined with readability, or at least some depth combined with readability. Again, it depends on the author, right? It does not require training and specialized understanding to get a grasp of what the commentator is trying to get across. However, there are some drawbacks to the hybrid commentary. Some of the drawbacks or cons are you often find inconsistency on the readability, since some of those who write in this category lean towards the scholarly end and some lean towards the bottom end of the spectrum here. So when you get a scholarly one, you almost always know it's going to be a difficult read if you don't understand the languages. When you get the bottom, that we'll talk about in a moment, you almost always know that anybody can read it, for the most part, and understand it. But with the hybrids, it's inconsistent in this. Even within the same commentary, sometimes it's inconsistent. If you're reading a commentary on Mark, there might be times when it's readable and there might be times when it's too technical, because that hybrid, it's hard sometimes to find that sweet spot in the commentary. It provides some vital information, but there's other vital information that's often neglected in order to address all audiences, including application points. So sometimes there's application points that are neglected because it's trying to include audiences, and sometimes they're trying to get the application in, so they neglect other key features because they're trying to broaden the audience. Now, I like hybrids. I own a lot of hybrids. I guess I technically own a lot in all three of the categories. But I do like what hybrids do, and there are some authors that do this very, very, very well. And I'm about to share one of those with you. But we just have to be aware that there's give and take on every single one of these types. So in the hybrids, there's really kind of a line, if you will, or maybe going up and down would be better. There's the upper end where it leans more towards the scholarly, technical, but it's still considered hybrid. There's the middle, and then there's the lower end where it has a little bit of that hybrid, but it also leans more towards the general population and readability above anything and everything else. And so here, on the upper end of that, one of my favorite authors of all time, Ben Witherington III. Ben Witherington III does an outstanding job in his commentaries. Now, I will say, you got to be careful with Ben Witherington because some of his commentaries are in that technical category. I'm reading one on the book of Isaiah that just came out last year, and that would definitely fall in that technical. Now, maybe on the lower end of that technical category, that scholarly category, but it would definitely fall there. It gets a little complicated at times. But he does a lot of them that are just on the upper end of the hybrid. And so he's really great. He provides a lot of wealth of background information. And he actually does a good job with the hybrids of integrating the primary source material from time to time, as well as secondary sources. Let me get a drink. In the middle, you would have the college press commentaries. Now, these are, if you remember a long time ago, they used to be in this really ugly 80s teal green jacket with like black lines on it, I think it was, whatever color lines were. And it said college press commentaries. And you would have Great men of faith wrote them. Many of the men were really smart, and now they've updated them, by the way, and they're still updating some of them. But now you can get some, man, the college press commentaries, they're right in the middle. They're made for people who want that scholarly approach but don't have that education. And almost every single one is made like that. And it's got wonderful authors within it. For example, one of my favorite authors within that series is Richard Oster. He's a professor at Harding School of Theology. And he does an outstanding job on the Corinthian letters. You've got Alan Black, who's another professor who did an outstanding job. You've got several people. You've got Roper, who wrote one that did an outstanding job. All of these people, a lot of them do really, really well. And so if you're going to get a set in the middle category, I highly recommend the College Press one. Now, again, while they've updated it and refreshed it, it is still a little bit on the older side. But they're good examples, and I think you'll find that a lot of it is consistent with the affiliation of the Churches of Christ and Christian churches movement. Excuse me. Now, on the lower end of this, you would have and I like this commentary series. Now, I will say I don't agree with a lot of what's in it from time to time, depending upon which author, but I do like this, and it's called the Interpretation Commentary Set. Now, I don't recommend getting that just because it's one of those that you got to kind of get. It doesn't read like most commentaries. You got to get used to how it reads. But it is a really good one that would probably be on the lower end there because it does try to give a little bit more application and food for thought for life in it. But it still does produce a little bit of that scholarly stuff up at top as well. And so there's another one, the Pillar New Testament Commentaries. And I'm kind of, some of the Pillar New Testament commentaries I would put either at the top or at the technical level. Some of them I would put in the middle, and some I would put at the lower end of it. So the Pillar, I don't suggest buying that set just because you really need to go off the author on the Pillar. Same can be said about the Interpretation. But by the way, I'm a big fan. I do not believe everything he writes, but if Ben Witherington III or F.F. Bruce wrote a book, as long as it's not technical or as long as, flip through it first, make sure that it works for you, but I highly suggest most of what they write. So we have the technical / scholarly. Then we have the hybrid. Now we have the consumer or the popular commentary. And by consumer / popular commentary, I'm talking about those that are made for the general population. These commentaries are created for the normal person, the normal consumer, and they're generally a very easy to understand, quick read. It rarely uses the original languages within it, and it explains almost everything for you. Now, I say that, and it may come off as I don't like them. Actually, there are some outstanding ones that I even use out there. But I want to cover, as I've done with the others, some of the pros and cons of this. Some of the pros are it's the easiest of types to read and to understand, and it can quickly be read and it can quickly be applied into whatever you're teaching. It helps, another one is it helps to identify possible application of the text. Now there's some really great ones out there. On your sheet you'll see the NIV application commentary. And the NIV application commentary, it is what it says it is. I mean, it takes it and it tries to apply it for you. And that's great. In fact, if you come over to, I've got a software program, and we're going to get into software here in a moment. But if you come over to the screen that I have set up over here, hopefully you can see my cursor. We're going to come back to this passage in a few moments because we're going to be studying it together. But if you come over and scroll down, now I've got a digital version of this. You can buy the hard copy. Here it says this is the original meaning of the text right here. So it tells you exactly what this is. Now, this is why I said do the work on your own first, because this could be wrong if you've not done the work. You're assuming that they get everything right if you don't do your own work. But not only does it have the original meaning, it then has bridging contexts in here. And so here, not only do you have the bridging, so you've got the original meaning, and then after the original meaning, you've got it where it talks about, okay, before we get to the application, how do we bridge the gap between it and us, that author and us? And so you've got this bridging the context part right here, followed by the application. How is it significant to us today? Right? See, you can see right here, here's some application. Think sensibly. Don't be carried away by emotional reactions. And so you see the NIV application commentary, it proves one of these benefits of applying the text. Another pro of the consumer and popular ones is it's great for all levels of Christian maturity. A brand new Christian can pick up one of these. For example, the Baker Illustrated Bible Commentary. They can pick that up, which I've got a copy right here because we're going to, again, go back to it in a moment. But a brand new Christian can pick this up and they can easily follow along and read and get an understanding of what's going on after they've done their own work here. But there's also some drawbacks to this commentary type. The drawbacks of the consumer or popular commentaries include they do not always do a good job supporting their claims. Now, as much as I like several of the NIV application commentaries, often they don't support some of the claims being made. And this is especially true in study Bibles. So, study Bible notes would fall within this realm of the consumer popular. If you have a study Bible, there's usually that line at the bottom of the page, and then really small underneath, it'll have a commentary under it. It's a commentary of the whole Bible. But often, it tells you what to think. It doesn't explain how they got to what they think. And so, it doesn't always support its claims. That's one of the downsides. That just, by the way, means you have to be extra careful. Just like the other two, there's other negatives to this. It can often be so general and shallow that it gives no depth or no new insight. Often, some of these are just shallow and wide, but they have no meat to them. And so if you're not careful when you're looking through, I always look through a book, a commentary, a Bible, whatever it might be, I always thumb through it, whether it's digitally thumbing through it on Amazon or thumbing through it in a bookstore before I buy it, because I want to know what is this going to give me if I purchase this. But the third drawback, and I mentioned this a moment ago about study Bibles, it can lean towards telling you what to think rather than explaining how the author arrived at their statement. And so it can lean towards, here's what this means, but it never gives you the backdrop of, well, how did you get there with it? So examples of consumer commentaries, and again, they're not all bad. I just want you to be aware of the positives and drawbacks of these. Some examples are the NIV application commentary set, and I believe these are on your handout. Another example is the Truth for Today commentary set. Now, you've probably seen these if you're Church of Christ. They have been around for a long time. Now they put them in really nice wrapped, shiny red jackets. And they're really, really wonderful in many ways. I mean, Eddie Clore is one of the people that's worked with them for a long time, and several other really well-known ministers do it. But you got to be careful with I'm not just saying Truth for Today, but these types of commentaries, the consumer commentaries, because they often lend themselves not so much to explanation, but to here's what you need to think. Now, Truth for Today is a really good commentary, but it's not a technical and it's not a hybrid commentary. It's on that lower end. But that's great. We need we need more of these commentaries that people can pick up and read. In fact, Truth for Today commentaries are really good commentaries if you're brand spanking new to teaching. I suggest the Baker Illustrated commentary first, the one I held up a moment ago. But Truth for Today commentaries are really good just to work through a book. In fact, that's what they're created for. It's also helpful to know why a commentary was created. Truth for Today is created to teach so that it can be taught, basically. I mentioned the Baker Illustrated Bible Commentary and the Bible Handbook by Baker, but also there's Study Bible footnotes. Now, some study Bibles have better footnotes than others. The NET Bible footnotes, which I believe you can only get online, is really outstanding. The ESV Study Bible notes are really, really good. Now, I don't agree with all of what they say, but the reason they're really good is because often they will tell you things such as, here's varying views on this. Whereas, while the NIV Study Bible notes do that occasionally, most of the time the NIV gives you one rendering of it, and here's what it is, basically. Again, nothing wrong with the NIV Study Bible. I prefer the ESV Study Bible notes. So here's where we are so far. First, we have to choose by the author. Then we have to choose by the type. And then third, we choose by belief. Now, this is important as well. While you do not have to know or have to have every commentary you own be by the same belief system, whether that's, basically, you don't have to own only Church of Christ commentaries. You don't have to own, if you're Baptist, only Baptist commentaries. If you're Catholic, you don't have to own only Catholic commentaries. In fact, I believe you do a disservice if you don't look and see what else is out there, but you want to know what each commentator comes from. I'm from the Church of Christ Fellowship. We have commentators coming from a variety of backgrounds in the Church of Christ. Everything from we don't believe in anything to we believe in everything, basically. And so we got to be cautious about what the belief system of the author is for that commentary. You certainly want to know what their background is and where they come from. Knowing their belief construct will help you evaluate their writing and the motives. We all have motives when we write. We all have motives when we speak. And we don't understand the motives of others until we know where they come from. For example, we want to ask, is the author Baptist? Are they Calvinist? Are they Catholic? Are they Restorationist, which would be Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, Christian Church? Are they Pentecostal? Are they Anglican? The Anglicans put out some pretty good commentaries occasionally. Are they Presbyterian or Methodist? You see where I'm going with this? We need to look at that. Do they believe? We also need to know more about their background than just what faith tradition they come out of. We need to know, do they believe certain things? Because that's going to influence the rest of what they write. Do they believe in a literal 7-day creation, or do they believe in a figurative one? If I'm reading, if I'm reading a commentary on Genesis, I want to know how they take creation, how they take the flood. Is it literal or is it metaphorical? Figurative. Do they believe in miracles? If I'm reading a book on Mark, if I'm reading a book on John, if I'm reading any of the Gospels, if you will, even Acts, I want to know, do they believe miracles were real? There's authors out there that believe Scripture is you would never know it by reading them, but you don't understand why they say some things until you understand that they come from the belief system, that the Bible's a really great book, but it's not historically accurate. It's just a bunch of folklore and stories out there. So I want to know, do they believe in the miracles? I want to know how they view the Bible overall. So, for example, if I'm reading a commentary on the book of Revelation, I want to know, what is their tradition that they come out of? Is it Baptist, Catholic, fill in the blank? But I also want to know, do they see things out of the figurative mentality, or do they see it more as the literal? I want to know, do they come from... Now, sometimes you don't know this till you read, but you can Google people's names and find out a lot about them. By the way, if you don't know authors and you're looking for commentaries, Google names. Find out about them. I want to know a lot about this person before I pick up their commentary. Now, I may disagree with 50% of what the person believes and says, I might still buy that commentary because I'm interested in hearing the other side. But I will say this, if you're a new Christian, if you're a person that's been a Christian for a while, but you're not strong in your faith, you want to start out with those that agree. And then you want to move out down the road. And you need to understand that just because they say it, just because they've got PhD after their name means nothing. That doesn't mean they're right in what they write. Fourth, choose by sight. Now, this is, to me, you may not have this issue. I do. I want to see what it looks like. Is it easy to navigate that commentary? For example, going back to the Baker illustrated commentary here. I like a couple of things in this commentary. If you look up here in the top corner, it shows me where the passage is that we're looking at on that page. And it shows me right here too on every page. And then you see how it's broken up real nicely right here. See, I like this because they're easy to navigate. Some commentaries, especially some of the older commentaries, are incredibly difficult to navigate. So I would suggest, fourth, and this may not be crucial to you, but it's crucial to me. Scan through the commentary, look at its layout, see how it flows. Ask yourself, is this going to drive me crazy trying to understand this? The Keil and Ilsch one that I mentioned earlier for the Old Testament, that's scholarly. Part of the reason I can only do it in small blurbs is because not only is it dense, but it is incredibly horribly laid out. By the way, if you're getting one digitally, it still is important. See, you can see my digital screen right here. How is this laid out, right? I like it clean and crisp and easy to understand and see. So a couple of other things. We must also utilize and be aware of other helpful resources. Now, I'm not going to go in depth about this, but there's other resources that are helpful. Bible handbooks, and the Baker Trio has a handbook in it. Bible survey books, Survey of the New Testament, Survey of the Old Testament, where it gives you a bigger idea, but it still breaks it down into smaller parts. Background resources. So what was it like in the New and Old Testament? Harmonies of the Gospel and harmonies of the Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, if you will, where it weaves all of them together so you can get the overall picture of everything and how it played out. Lexicons. Now, I want to talk about lexicons for a moment. A lexicon is used when you're trying to better understand a word. Now, I was actually talking to our youth minister, Charlie, today about one of the lexicons. It's Bauer. Don't worry, I'm not going to recommend Bauer because it's like $175 to purchase. But in Bauer's lexicon, if you don't know Greek, it's a Greek lexicon for the New Testament. If you don't know Greek, you're never going to find what you're looking for because it is literally Greek with no translation of each word, just Greek. And then next to the Greek, okay, then you get some English, but it's Greek. You got to find it through the Greek. So some lexicons are really difficult, but those are usually the ones that are $150, $175, such as Bauer's. There's two lexicons I highly recommend. Two lexicons I recommend. One being, and they're old, but they work really well. One and by the way, they're very cheap. I probably want to say that. You can get both for under $50. One lexicon would be Thayer's or Thayer's, I hear it pronounced differently, Greek-English lexicon. And it looks old. You can get it on christianbook.com, but you can get it on Amazon, I'm sure, too. But Thayer's Greek and English lexicon. But the other one is the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew lexicon. Now, these two, by the way, all of the things I'm talking about, we're going to talk about software in a little bit. You can get them all digitally as well. But I like Thayer's and Brown Driver Briggs for a reason, and that is, if you remember back in the day, the Strong's Number Bible, you can find the Greek and the Hebrew through the strong number system. Meaning, if you go online, and there's resources that are free that are listed on your handout, if you go online to those resources and you click the Strong's number where it shows the number under each word, to go find more information about that word, all you have to do is look up that number. Once you look that number up, you know you're looking at that Greek or Hebrew word. So it definitely is a help. And so because they use strong numbering system, I absolutely love those two for people who don't know the original languages. Now, some softwares, if you pay enough money, I'll show you one of those. You can get this to do it for you just by simply clicking on a word in English, and you can choose to look at the Greek and choose to pull up any attached resources for it. But also, finally, we also want to utilize Bible maps and charts. That has not much to do with what we come up with, but I just want to put that out there again. So dig. When we're digging, we're wanting to ask, what do others see? So we're looking at, what are they saying about this text, right? But the next slide here is where we go now. After we choose, and by the way, we just talked about how to choose commentaries, and that took a long time, but I thought that was an important discussion to have. The next thing is we want to look at the letter E. The first E in deep is examine. When we're talking about examine, we're asking ourselves, what do others think? So dig is what do others see in that text, and bring out, if you will. E is we're examining what others think about the text. And I would argue it's what others think about my work. You see, this is where we get into comparison studies here. We start comparing what they've written with what we've found, what they've seen with what we've seen, with what they think with what we think, right? What do others think about my work? This is found by comparing their work with my work. This is where we involve a community of others. You see, one of the beautiful things about teaching and about studying and about theology is that it's done in community. If we only listen to ourselves and we never bounce it off of people who are more knowledgeable than us, then we don't know if we're right or wrong. And so we want to see what they have to say, what they think about this. The idea for examine is to look deeper at the teachings of other people now. Again, keep in mind, we've already done our searching of the text. We've got a pretty deep understanding in our mind of the text. So it's not like we're going to this to ask, tell me what it says. We already believe we know what it says. Now we're just getting a sounding board for what we believe. It is to identify, so by the way, the two blanks under examine is examine and think. And then the next two blanks says, it is to identify where do others agree and disagree with my original work. It's not only important to know where they agree, it's important to know where they disagree. By the way, it's important to know why they disagree with my understanding as well. It asks, how do my observations and conclusions compare? Examine means you are examining the ideas of others in light of your original work. So how do I determine whose answer is correct when I do this? Well, we have to ask questions while we're reading. Not the Bible this time, when we're reading the commentary or when we're reading the handbook. We've got to start asking questions of the author. If I don't have my commentaries with me here at home, but if you were to look in a lot of my commentaries and a lot of the books I have, I'm thinking of F.F. Bruce, Apostle of the Heart Set Free being one of them. If you look through it, I scribble all over. I have questions. I'm talking to my imaginary friend. But really, I'm talking to the author. I'm asking questions about the text that helps me think. You don't have to write in your commentaries if you don't want, but it helps me think. Because I want to ask certain questions. And I draw in it, and I draw arrows and underline and circle because I'm connecting things. One of those questions that I'm looking at and trying to connect is, how on earth did they arrive at their conclusion? In other words, what was their process? How did they support their understanding of the text? Whether it agrees or not, I want to know how they support theirs. I also need to ask myself in the meantime, how did I arrive at mine? Is it similar to the way they arrived? Is it different? I want to ask, does their conclusion fit the overall context of the scripture based on my understanding? Does their conclusion of this book, does it agree with the conclusion of other authors of other traditions? And here's why I say tradition, because here's the reality. If you get people from the same church building in the same place, they're often going to say the same thing. But if you can grab people from a variety of church buildings, put them in the same place, now if they're saying the same thing, I'm a little bit more interested in listening because they've heard different things and they've studied it out different ways, but they're still coming to that same conclusion. This is, by the way, why I think we ought to look in Scripture first and foremost, because we want to see, what do the ancients say, and do the ancients agree with the people in the Old Testament, and do all of them agree with the teachings of Jesus, and does the teachings of not teaching of Jesus, if you will, but does all of that agree with whatever anyone else says from that point forward? Because it all combines, and if we know that it's traveled over time, there's a much, not, unless Jesus said it, it's not a guarantee, but there's a much more probable chance that what they're saying should at least be given weight of thought if it disagrees with you. Do others agree or disagree with my conclusion? I want to ask that, and I want to ask why. Keep in mind that at the end of the day, when you're doing all of this, and that the reason we do all this is because at the end of the day, I have to give an account to God, for why I believe what I believe. I can't get to heaven and say, well, I read this in a Myers New Testament commentary, so I believed that. Or I can't get up there and say, well, I read a commentary by this author who said hell wasn't real, so I decided I was going to do whatever I want. No, that's not how it works. I have to give an answer for why I believe the Bible. And so I want to ask questions, but I also want to have sounding boards as well. We must give an account, but remember that no person is correct 100% of the time, and that includes myself. So we also want to bounce our ideas off of other scholars, because we don't know everything, and we need to make sure that we're trying to learn what we can. Things to keep in mind. Keep in mind, and this is your next blank, you might be wrong in your conclusion. But also keep in mind in your next blank that they might be wrong in their conclusion. We must ensure that we are not reading our own biases into the text here. But we also must be aware that the commentator has biases. And we must understand that and weigh that when we're trying to understand what they're saying. Digital resources is where we're going to move to here in a moment, and you've got those listed. But I wanted to say one thing about biases. I bring biases to the text, even though I try not to. Other people do as well. Now, I'm about to give an example. Now, I'm not making any kind of statement except using this as an example, which it's probably not very popular, but it is what it is. When we talk about biases, because this is the really hot thing in churches, I'm just going to use this as an example. Women's roles. So, you've got people on every end, on both ends of the spectrum and everywhere in between, but let me paint a picture. Somebody who's really huge into the feminist movement gets up in a Bible class and says women ought to preach in public, and that's a God-given right. The question I've got to ask is, how did they get to that point? Now, hopefully they're sharing some texts. One of those texts would be, and I was talking about this with the youth minister, one of those texts would be Phoebe, right? Well, Phoebe, it says, was a deacon. Well, technically it says the word that either means deacon or a servant, and everywhere else in that surrounding context, it meant just someone who served, but now all of a sudden it means a deacon. But that's another discussion, why I think that's a straw argument. Here's what I'm getting at. If I'm a huge feminist, and let's say I'm female, I'm not obviously, but let's say I am, and I stand up in a class and say I ought to be able to preach, Do you think there's some bias going on in my interpretation of Scripture? But at the same time, if I'm a husband and I tell my wife, woman, you do what I say, so get in the kitchen and cook me my dinner. Because God says I'm the man of the house. And you submit to me, woman. You like all my womans in there? You think I've got bias in that too? You see, we got to be careful about our biases because often we read something that's not really reading what it says, but it reads what we want it to say if we're not careful. And there's countless other ways of putting that. So moving from there, I want to get to our digital Bible study tools. Now, I've listed several on here, and I'm just going to walk through a couple of these with you guys because I think this is really good and important for you guys to practice. So we're going to start with one, and that's Blue Letter Bible. And I'm pulling it up on my screen here for you guys to see. And let me see if I can actually make this a little bit bigger for you as well. There we go. This little picture of this nice woman right here. I have no idea who she is, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, so let's say we're looking at 1 Timothy chapter 2. So what I've done, which you can't see, is I came up here. Why is it in King James? I'm going to come up here and I'm going to type 1 Timothy. And let's do 8 through 15 just because we're going to do that exercise in a minute. And then I'm going to do a drop down. This is blueletterbible.org. This is why I like this site. Now, this is one of the oldest sites out there, but it's still a good site. I'm going to do a drop down, and let's say I want to look at the ESV because that's one of my favorite translations right there. So I'm looking at the ESV, and then I'm going to click go. Boom. See, I'm on the ESV now. Now I've got a sentence by sentence breakdown of this. So when you're examining what other people think, there are free resources out there. And those free resources, while they're helpful, they are limited. I want to be clear on that. But going back to Blue Letter Bible, here's one of the neat things. Now, if you haven't looked around on this, you've got all kinds of different things you can do. You can do lexicon, you can do a question here. You've got links, you've got citing, so you can copy, share, link it, cite it, print it, all this stuff. You've got, let me just go through this top bar. Look at this. You can search the Bible, you can search the lexicon, you can search theological terms, you can study. Look, they've got text commentaries, audio, video commentaries, harmony of the Gospels. So they got Bible reference works right here. They've got theological resources. Now again, this looks amazing. When you click on them, let's go to commentaries here. Now, it is somewhat limited in the commentaries, but you know, and you're going to get these commentaries pulled up whenever you search, by the way. But see, you've got all these things here that you can look at. Let me go back. And then I'm going to go back to the study tab here. And then you've got theological resources. You've got articles, books. You've got Blue Letter Bible, theological frequently asked questions. You've got missional resources. That's interesting. I never noticed the cult resources there. And then you've got media and music even. Then you've got devotionals up here, so you can look at different types of devotionals. You've got a help menu with now I suggest the help menu if you want to use Blue Letter Bible. There's a better one out there. I'll show you in a minute. But you've got products you can get, ministries, and then you can donate. Obviously, they want you to give money. But here's what I want to show you. If you search for a word, for a text, it'll put the whole set right through here. But watch this. Okay, let's go to 1 Timothy 2:4. God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and to come to knowledge of the truth. Look at this word right here. You've got tools. If you hover over, you've got interlinear, you've got Bibles, you've got all these. I'm just going to click it, and here's what comes up. Bam! Look at this. Here you've got the interlinear, you've got the Bibles. So here you've got different translations of this same verse right here. You've got cross references going on, right? So Isaiah 45:22 and Isaiah 49:6. Really, here, I'm sorry, those are phrases correlating with it. You've got here where it talks about the original text, and then you've got all this down here, right? All this down here. And see, you can even drop down tools for each one of these as well. So that's the cross references. Then you've got commentaries. Now, again, it's a little bit limited in commentaries, but you've got audio, video. I don't agree with a lot of this guy's teaching, but he actually is really interesting to listen to. You've got all these textual commentaries. Matthew Henry is ancient. I don't recommend Matthew Henry. I mean, it's kind of a fun read, but he's really old. Spurgeon is a really well-known name, and several others. And so you've got those. You've got dictionaries even. Look, you've got Easton's Bible Dictionary here. You've got all this. You've got Nave's Topical Bible. Now, keep in mind, if you're looking at this going, wow, you've got Vines, you've got Smiths and Hitchcocks. If you're looking at this going, wow, I've been in the church a long time and these things are ancient. You're right. It's because that there's no, what is that called? Rights to them anymore. They're all, you can put them up for free. All these things are free online right now. But look here, you got interlinear. Now, here, this is where it gets interesting. Here's the Greek, right? Hos Pantos, and then you can go on and on. This is the word for God, for example. So if you go through, I love the little question mark it has right there. That's the word for God I just highlighted. So look, let's go down through and find that word, God, right there. Bingo. But look at this, Strong's. It gives you a Strong's number right here. Remember Thayer's dictionary? Remember the Brown Driver Briggs? I'm sorry, Thayer's lexicon and the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon. There's your Strong's number right there. You can even look at phrases and research phrases. So I like this. I'm not going to go into this more detailed. I just wanted to show you all the different things that this has here. Now, there is another one, and this one's a little bit more powerful. This is one that you can customize and set up. Now, I don't use these because I use a software that I'll show you in a minute. But see here, once again, you've got read, you've got all this stuff right here. You've got study. And by the way, this is the BibleStudyTools.org right now. You've got all these resources. You've got teaching. Now, here's the danger of this. Do not just click here, print a sermon, and teach it. And then you've got newsletter for you. So this is another one, and it's just laid out differently. If you go to read, you can go to reading plans, books of the Bible. Now this one makes you pick a book before you can actually open it up and study. But see, you can even look daily Bible study, devotionals, concordances, dictionaries, encyclopedias, history. You can look at all kinds of stuff. So this one's a good one as well. These are definitely things that are helpful to the studier. And then I put another one on there, Christian Classics Library. This is great. It has tons of free books online for you, and I think you'll find it helpful. Two quick softwares. Okay, this is Olive Tree, which is listed. Now both softwares are initially free. This is a little bit more user-friendly in some ways. And this is, now I own this. I only own like a few things on this. So I only use this when I'm looking for specific resources. You can see my resources bar. But here's the benefit of this. I can come in here and I can search for pretty much anything I want. Man, I don't do this much. There it is. See, right here I've got Matthew 7, 1 through 6. If I want to go to Matthew 9, let's say, I type it in and look. Whatever my primary I'm looking at, it comes up there. Now, I can split the screen and do all kinds of other stuff in this. But Olive Tree is a great start. There's some benefits of Olive Tree. I've listed those in your handout. The pros are it's cost and user-friendly if you want to do digital. And by the way, digital makes your life 10 times easier and makes it so much quicker if you're comfortable with the digital form. This is a downloadable program, by the way. The negative is it can be limiting on resources. Generally speaking, it's going to have the resources you're looking for. For those of us who use some pretty different resources, it doesn't always have that. And bear with me, we're going to go about 5 minutes over tonight, but we'll get a break next week because I'll be out of town. Now, this is Logos Bible Software. When you log on, you're going to see a screen like this, and you're going to put it up there, right? And then this is just kind of your home page here. I like it. You can set up to have whatever you want come up. But then you have, if I can get away, then you can do a search. So if I'm on my, if I'm here, I can search Matthew 7:1. Now your layout doesn't have to look like this. This is mine. It doesn't matter why mine looks like this. But this is a powerhouse. Now, Logos is initially free and offers some free resources. The pros of Logos is that it's got a lot more of the modern resources, and it has a humongous library of commentaries. If you want to go paperless, Logos is really a good way to go. The cons is it's a lot more costly so if you have the same product, the NIV application commentary Logos versus Olive Tree, it's going to be cheaper on Olive Tree. But Logos is also not nearly as user friendly. It takes a while to learn. Now they have tutorials, and it does take a while to learn all this. But and so you can even see exegetical guides and all kinds of stuff here. Now this is a little overwhelming. I just wanted to show you that this is something that is possible and out there if you want to. Man, I did that and I didn't even show that to you guys, did I? Man, now I got to go back. Okay, this is Olive Tree. I've been talking. I've been looking at my screen. I'm sorry, guys. Thank you, Chris. This is Olive Tree. I think I showed you that. Olive Tree has all of this right here. Hey, so Chris, will you answer me? Did you guys see the websites? And then the next one is Logos. Now, Logos is a lot more complicated. This is what I was talking about. You've got your home screen here. I'll go back to the websites, Chris. Thank you. You've got your home. Man, how long have I been staring at that screen? I'm sorry. Man, I thought I clicked the button. You've got your home screen of Logos, which mine's struggling to keep up because I've got so many programs running here. And then you've got this layout, which this is the one that's a lot more expensive, but it does a whole lot more. But it's really not as important as this one. If you're going to buy software, Olive Tree right here is probably going to be your best bet. You can look in different resources here. Nope, I don't want to download that resource. You can tailor it in different ways over here. You can add different windows and so forth. So it can be tailored pretty well. I know several who use this, even several preachers who use Olive Tree. And then the websites are here. I'm sorry. Let me quickly run through this website. This website right here, basically, I'm not going to go through all this again, but you can see all of these different things that you can participate in up here. If you type in up here, I had typed in 1 Timothy 2 right here and clicked ESV and then went there. You can see this, and basically when you click the word tools, it brings up all of this. So you can see the Greek. There's the Strong's number for the Greek. And by the way, there's training for this. It'll give you. There's Bibles that you can see it in different translations and compare, cross-references, commentaries here, and then you get to dictionaries right here. So 1 Timothy 2:5. So look, you can look up sons of men, daughters of men, sons of God, daughters of men. And then you have the MISC application over here. And so the other one is basically, it does a lot of the same stuff. It's a little less user-friendly, but it's a little bit more powerful. You can see that you can read and study here you can read blogs, you can do a Bible study, Bible devotional, you can teach with getting illustrations, you can sign up for the newsletter even. So really, you might use both if you don't want to purchase a program over here. But those are helpful websites and helpful tools for you. So we're going to take just a minute and we're going to work through something for a moment. If you look at Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 6, if you go to Blue Letter Bible and look around that site, or go to a software and look around there and look for Matthew 7, 1 through 6, you're going to find a lot of different things. You're going to find different views on it. You're going to find different understandings. Same thing's going to happen if you look at the 1 Timothy 2 verses 8 through 15 verse, especially that one, because it has to do with women's roles and so forth. One of the best things you can do is to utilize verses and just go play around with this. Don't do serious study with these different things at first. Play around with them. Get the free versions of the software as well. And just see what goes on with those. But here's what I want to practice, you guys to practice between this session and next. And again, remember, I'm out of town, so we're not going to have a session this next week. It'll be in 2 Thursdays that we have our next session. And I'll cover these websites and stuff again, the software again on it briefly since we ran out of time. But here's what I want you to do on your own. Spend time over the next 2 weeks working through Ephesians 4, verse 17 through 32. Specifically, I want you to use the first 7 steps, the reach and then the DE of deep, those that we have covered. Use those and come to an understanding of Ephesians 4, verse 30, and answer the question, what grieves the Holy Spirit? How is the Holy Spirit grieved by us? What grieves the Holy Spirit? This is something that a lot of people misunderstand, but it's actually pretty easy once you go through these steps in order. You got to keep in mind that part of that is looking elsewhere in Scripture for it. Hint. But remember to utilize all the steps so far covered in the correct order that we covered them. If you do that, I think you'll find this is not nearly as complicated, or you might find you've had a misunderstanding of what grieves the Holy Spirit in regards to what God actually says grieves the Holy Spirit. I believe if you go through this, the seemingly difficult question will become easy. And again, hopefully you've learned a lot. I am so sorry I didn't put that screen up, but I will put it up later for you whenever we talk next time. Again, the resources and tools are on your sheet, so you can go and download and look at those 2 free ones without purchasing Logos or Olive Tree. You can download a free one. You can go to the 2 websites, look around, get a feel for what you like. There's obviously you can do paper, and if you're choosing commentaries, dictionaries, whatever, it doesn't matter, paper or digital. You look for it the same way. You look into them the same way. Well, I've enjoyed this one. I was really excited about doing this one because now we're getting into the tools and the techniques on how you go about digging in and how you go about finding all that information. And so as you go through the next 2 weeks, do this. I'm so excited to hear what you have and what you find in this. And again, the more practice you do, the more easy this is going to become and the more quickly you'll be able to do it in the future. I'm going to stay on just for a couple of minutes. If anyone has any questions or if you wanted me to show you something again, I'm more than happy to do that. So I'll stay on a few minutes, and if I don't hear any questions or thoughts, then I will get off. And the way to contact me would be through the chat box, and I'll open up the Facebook Messenger if you need to use that if you don't have a login. Thank y'all. Have a wonderful evening, and God bless.